Alright. So Jojo's blew up, so I decided to create another tier list. This is going to be all the stand users from Stone Ocean. The main reason I'm not going to attempt a full series tier list, at least I don't think I will, is because I just don't have a good memory for it. The main fights stick in your head, you know. Jonathan, Cars, Jotaro, but like the individuals, like I have no idea where to scale Bruford off the top of my head, you know. But I just watched Stone Ocean, obviously. It took me a bit to make the list just because I like to overthink things, but the criteria for this list will mostly be that people within tiers are ordered by who I think would win, but the tiers themselves are debatable, right? Obviously. That's why it's a tier list and not a ranking video. That was the big thing, is I only think that tiers should define who absolutely should win. Another thing about this, stands are very unconventional power system. Rocky intentionally wrote them to be in a way to where it's hard to say A stand is stronger than B stand, B stand stronger than C stand, A stand stronger than C stand, right? Goku got beat up by Vegeta, Frieza beats up Vegeta, Frieza beats up Goku. He tried very hard to avoid doing that in the later parts, and I like it a lot, but it does make power scaling a tier list like this very convoluted and kind of weird. Are there any other pre-emphases? Not really. For the most part, characters don't actually have drastic differences in speed throughout the part. Everyone is kind of able to fight one another except for the people that are just like normal humans, you know? But for where they are, we'll have different tiers. Everyone is clumped together in 3 kind of distinct tiers. I think 4. And then there's 4 or 5 other tiers that are made up of characters who just cliff each other. Because that's kind of how this part is, but we'll see as we get into it. This is the only tier list I actually assembled beforehand, because it's really annoying to try and think of it off the top of my head. It took me like an hour of thinking to kind of organize it beforehand, because I haven't watched it in about a week. But the first tier we have is the normal human tier. This is for characters whose abilities are too convoluted, or the conditions for them to work are really strict, and it's hard to say in a versus battle setting that they would do anything. The worst, by far, is Highway to Hell. Thunder McQueen. I can't fucking stand that that's his name. But it's an amazingly defensive stand. If it was in the hands of someone like Poochie, he would probably be able to use it very well. The problem is, it doesn't... You have to tie if you want to attack, if you want to win. It gets forced into a draw, which is kind of by definition the worst stand ever for this kind of list. So maybe it should be a tier below, because it's impossible for him to win, like ever. But for now he's at the bottom. Guccio is above him. He has the stand Survivor, which is infamously called the weakest stand by Dio. I would agree somewhat. I think it has its purpose, obviously, in the story, and that was the entire point. But the stand itself just makes people mad, and Guccio isn't anything special. He's got 12 sets of ribs. Above him is Ungolo. Now, Ungolo is probably the most contentious placement in this tier. Essentially, the reason I put Ungolo where he is because everyone above him should have the means to create a character to undo his ability. The question is whether or not they're intelligent enough. Weather Report was intelligent enough to figure this out and then force the artist to do this. For instance, Emporio has a computer that he can pull out of burning down the house. So he can more than likely write up a story of Mr. Fix Everything Man, right? That's one possibility for it. And because all the others have stands which are physically capable of interacting with the world, you know, not Survivor or Highway to Hell, they all more than likely have the capability to create something to outdo Bohemian Rhapsody. So above him is Emporio. Emporio's ability is useful defensively, but doesn't really work offensively. He can pull out guns. So he can fire like a normal gun. That's cool. And he has like a computer, but that's not like an offensive ability. He would probably beat Ungolo, like I said, by just writing the story on his computer. But it is in the same tier. Maybe he would get killed by something before then. Above Emporio, though, is Mew Mew with Jailhouse Lock. We already saw that she beat Emporio in the story and that Emporio had to be saved by Jolene. So, pretty definitively, we can put her above him. However, the conditions for her to actually meet and activate her ability are actually very strict. If you assume that she fights anywhere outside of Green Dolphin, she's literally a normal human with no stand. So, that's kind of worth noting. But I'm just going to assume that we're going by if the conditions are met to use the stand within this tier, but not in comparison to other tiers. So, I do think that if she gets Jailhouse Lock off, that's more than likely better than Emporio using Burning Down the House or Bohemian Rhapsody. Above Jailhouse Lock, we have Yo-Yo Ma by D&G. So, this stand is really dangerous because of the fact that it's an automatic stand. It doesn't really matter the difference between the stand users yet, because they're all just normal humans in Jojo. But Yo-Yo Ma is fully capable of working on its own. We don't know how that works with Jailhouse Lock, so that's kind of a problem. Ultimately, though, if Yo-Yo Ma is sentient from Jailhouse or from D&G, it should mean that even if D&G gets affected by Jailhouse Lock, Yo-Yo Ma can still kill Mew Mew. So that should be that. Above Yo-Yo Ma, though, we have Marilyn Manson. This is because Marilyn Manson is able to create bets, and in a versus battle setting, it's very easy to say who on earth is going to bet with her in the middle of a fight. However, if her conditions are met, she definitely has the strongest stand so far. And the reason it's above specifically Yo-Yo Ma is because Yo-Yo Ma has to follow orders. We saw that Jolene and Anasui could actually command it to drive them, and that it's clearly capable of making its own decisions within a certain parameter. This means that Marilyn Manson would more than likely be able to order Yo-Yo Ma to participate in a bet. And more than likely Marilyn Manson would be able to figure out a way, or I guess her name was Mara Sean, right? Mara Sean would be able to figure out a way to beat Yo-Yo Ma through the bet. This kind of relies on the assumption that it would affect D&G, not Yo-Yo Ma, because Yo-Yo Ma is actually conventionally, like, indestructible from what we saw. So, if you go off of that assumption, she should be able to beat D&G, but it's all in the same tier. Donatello definitely has the most potential in this entire tier, but having to trick someone to enter a cave is a little strict. We do know that he can actually bring out memories of the Earth to the ground without going into the cave, so he was able to redirect bullets that happened in a mass shooting. But is this happening in Florida? Is this happening in, like, Texas? Is this happening in, like, Antarctica? It just kind of gets into that. So I put Donatello at the top here. If you assume this takes place in Florida, because the entire part takes place in Florida, he would be much higher. But I just don't really feel... I don't like that idea of just throwing him into a situation exactly where it benefits him. However, if he was thrown into a beneficial situation, he is the strongest in this tier without a doubt. But ultimately, they all rely really heavily on certain conditions, or they just don't have a strong stand ability. The tier above that, we have weak stand users. Now, it seems weird for all of these to be a tier below the tier above, but ultimately, Guess's Goo Goo Dolls doesn't have any real offensive capability in a battle setting. In the context of the story where she's like manipulating people in the jailhouse, it kind of makes more sense, but we saw that even before Jolene had really developed her stand or her fighting spirit at all, she was really easily able to bully Goo Goo Dolls. This means that anyone that has any decent offense should just be able to out-offense her. Kind of like John Gallier. John Gallier would probably be able to stay out of range of Goo Goo Dolls in the first place. And even if he doesn't, it's more than likely that his stand would still work on his gun. So, unless you think that the gun is separate from John Gallier, it's kind of weird. Why didn't Jolene's clothes not shrink then? Kind of gets into that whole argument. However, John Gallier would probably be... Actually, you know what? In hindsight, he would probably beat Sports Maximum too. Sports Maximum kind of has a highway to hell thing where if you assume it's neutral battle, we don't really know how many zombies he would be able to use. However, he himself can always become a zombie with his own ability, Limp Bizkit. So with Limp Bizkit, he's at least guaranteed himself where he becomes an invisible zombie. He can be conventionally defeated. He just has to be beat up really bad. But Goo Goo Dolls wouldn't know how to or where he is. We also know that Goo Goo Dolls isn't indiscriminate and that you do have to target it, so he would always beat Goo Goo Dolls. However, John Gallier would likely be able to tell where he is through wind currents. So, John Gallier would probably take it over Sports Maximum. However, both of them probably don't have what it takes to put down the guard. I don't remember his name. I don't even think they say it in the show. Whose stand is Planet Waves. So, I don't think they have the tenacity to like put him down or outlast him before Planet Waves hits them. Planet Waves especially is really dangerous for Sports Maximum because it's indiscriminate in tracks without the guard even being aware of it happening. The guard doesn't have to see where the person is for the meteors to track. This means that the meteors would hit Sports Maximum as a ghost and kill him again. John Gallier would be capable of predicting them, but we don't know if John Gallier would be capable of overcoming them. So, that's how this list should turn out. The reason they're here, though, is just because all these characters just don't have very good scaling, the characters above them. So first off, you're going to notice that this tier is very relative. And this is where the entire idea that the tier means that they're kind of debatable is really going to come into play. Emporia with Weather Report, we don't know if he can use every ability Weather Report has. He actually uses an ability that we never saw Weather Report use. Granted, that ability wouldn't have been useful in any of the other contexts. So we can't really say if he can use everything Weather Report can. And from there, we just know that he's got the physical strength of Weather Report, which is pretty good. And the oxygen ability. This puts him at least in this ballpark, but probably he doesn't have the experience, intelligence, or battle sense, fighting spirit to probably take any of these people down. Hermes really struggles because of the fact that she has like no good speed feats in the entire part. Her ability is powerful. If she lands the stickers on someone's head, it's almost certainly a GG. But the speed scaling kind of comes back and bites her. She just never has one fight where she's displayed to be like very fast. Her stand is deceptively strong though. It's almost able to match Jolene's Stone Ocean, or Stone Free. Because of the instance where Rikiel was on the ground, Jolene barraged him with Stone Free and couldn't kill him. And then Hermes cracks his skull with a single punch. Granted, that was after Jolene wore him down, so it's kind of, again, in the air. She has a lot of potential power, but it's hard for her to land it, and she does have to make contact to get the stickers onto someone. That's why I have her down here, specifically below Foo Fighters. Foo Fighters can attack from a distance by shooting bullets. She's able to fight at close range thanks to all the plankton in her body, so the guns can be used at short and long range. And because of all the planktons in her body and her ability to regenerate with water, she can heal herself. So even if Foo Fighters or Hermes lands like a critical hit on Foo Fighters, she can probably just heal it off. It comes down to the terrain, but that's a lot of these fights, because that's how this part is written. In general, though, I would definitely give it to Foo Fighters, who can attack better from a range and then heal off any damage that Hermes would manage to land. We did see Foo Fighters fight Kenzao, and she got beat. So, I mean, that's almost definitive. Granted, Foo Fighters was like a little bit dehydrated and couldn't restore during the fight, but that just means that she doesn't have the stamina to take down Kenzao. Next up above Kenzao, though, is Whitesnake. Whitesnake does have a ranged attack in the form of the acid, however, the acid actually has terrible time and isn't really practical in a fight. What's good about Whitesnake is the fact that it's an incredibly long range stand, so Poochie is never in too much immediate damage or danger, and then Whitesnake's ability to remove memory and stand discs means that it can essentially null you in a battle, if it's allowed to make contact. Saying that he'd make contact with Kenzao is a bit of a stretch, but at the same time he does know Kenzao's abilities. He's also very cautious, and we do know that because he understands most of his inmates' abilities, he would understand that he can use Feng Shui on his side before, like, earlier into the fight than most other characters would. Poochie should kind of have, like, the lore advantage just to be over Kenzao, but I think it is kind of debatable. This is, of course, Poochie with Whitesnake, not Sea Moon or Maiden Heaven. And then above Poochie we have Lane Wrangler. This one's actually probably the weirdest, but Lane Wrangler actually does make a statement that he thinks that he's got a better stand than Poochie. Jumpin' Jack Flash is actually pretty strong. If it weren't for the fact that he had to catch Jolene, I believe, off guard to get the spit on her the first time, I would actually put him in the tier above. But knowing what he knows of Poochie, he's confident that he's, like, above him. And then he has a very good ability. And then he's also able to fight, like, with his ability. Like, he's able to use it on himself with pretty good control to get into situations where he can land it on other people. Just given the statement is the main reason I have him over Poochie, not to mention the fact that he was able to incapacitate Weather and early Stone Ocean Jolene. This is important because Poochie actually should scale below, like, normal Weather Report and later Jolene. Actually, early Stone Ocean Jolene or mid Stone Ocean Jolene too, because of the prison ward fight where he admits that he would lose to her in a prolonged battle. So it's actually not out of realm of possibility for Jumpin' Jack to be above him, but they're in the same tier because it is a little bit more loose. Then we have the Jolene pose tier. So the main reason Rikiel is an entirely other tier above is because everyone below him I don't think has a way to deal with his ranged attacks. When you look at everyone on the tier below, they all have some means of attacking from a range. At the very least, Foo Fighters and Jumpin' Jack Flash do, but there's not really that manipulative. They can't really control how those ranged attacks work. Not to mention those ranged attacks can be intercepted by the rods. Everyone below him is pretty susceptible to his ability as well. We saw him pretty easily incapacitate Hermes and Emporio. Granted, Emporio didn't have Weather Report, but still. His ability is also very deadly, and considering everyone in the tier below does conform in some way to human biology, that means all he has to do is just wear them down a little bit and then land a fatal blow. He's also got insane durability, so even if any of them land one good hit on him, or a good few hits, because Jolene was able to barrage him with Stone Ocean and he just took it, that's not really enough to just win. That should mean he can pretty confidently take down anyone below him. At least one-on-one. Honestly, goes above him, though. Just because I think Diver Down is an ability that's, in a way, more versatile than it was even shown off. The ability to phase into anything is really very broad. Like, insanely broad. Like, if you think about it, he could dive into the ground and close distances, or he could dive into like a tree and attack Rikiel. Like, he's not really constricted by range conventionally. The only reason I think honestly has a case to be much lower is honestly when he was being affected by heavy weather, wasn't really able to fight Poochie, who had blinded himself and was like strained from his stand evolving into Sea Moon. So White Snake Poochie. They were both kind of nerfed and honestly lost. But it's hard to say if honestly was, considering that honestly was like part snail and Poochie was like just kind of blind. Honestly is that way more of a severe disadvantage in that, in terms of being nerfed. Not to mention that honestly can manipulate his own physiology with diving. So like for instance, if a rod enters his body, he could probably phase through his own body and remove it. Things like that. Above honestly though, we have Weather Report. This is mostly just down to the frogs. The Raining Frogs ability is just something that is really powerful, and it's kind of glossed over in that one fight, and he can't really do it everywhere because of how many instants are usually there, but the ability to rain poison dart frogs is really good. That's why normal Weather Report is here. We do have heavy weather higher in the list. I do think that it's not a tier above Honestly and Rikiel. You can make the case that Honestly could like dive into the frogs and remove their poison, or that Rikiel could suck all the heat out of the frogs so they don't explode. You can make that kind of case. However, he should at least be in the same tier, because I think it is contentious. Above Weather would be Sea Moon. Sea Moon is long enough range that Poochie shouldn't have to worry about being directly hit by the frogs, or Diver Down, or the rods. If this is the case, all Sea Moon has to do is get one good punch off on any of them, and then he wins. Because of this, it comes down to entirely whether or not you think their abilities can put down Sea Moon before he lands one punch. So, that's why I think that they're all in the same tier. I think you can argue Rikiel finding Poochie's location, honestly, being able to nullify the damage by diving down, Weather Report's frogs getting Poochie. But I would give it to Sea Moon more than not on all of them. Jolene is at the top because we saw that she could pretty directly nullify Sea Moon's ability with the Mobius strip. We do only have one Jolene, but by the end of the series, she is probably this high. Early on, she didn't have as good a grasp on her ability, and we know that after she read Jotaro's mind, she did actually gain Fighting Resolve. This is important because Fighting Resolve helps determine how strong your stand is in Jojo. And after learning the truth that Jotaro really did love her, and that he did everything he did to protect her, she felt way more impassioned to get back into the fight, which would actually make her stronger. So we do know that end of series Jolene should probably be the peak of like the normal stand users, kind of like everyone below. Whether she could beat everyone one-on-one is a little weird, but she should scale to about this tier, at least. That's why they're all in the same tier. I think in hindsight, no, I think Weather Report's probably there. The tier above, Kitaro. No one can do anything to time stop. I know that that's very boring. I know. It's very boring. But it's almost like Araki wrote a really overpowered ability into the plot, and then had to write him out of the story for the entire story until the final battle. So, You know, that's just how it be sometimes. Physically, Jotaro should also be the strongest person on the list so far. There shouldn't be anyone with any force stronger than Star Platinum that I know of. If you want to make like a case that like Donatello is in like New York and he can like replicate like 9/11 or something, or if you argue that like Donatello is like in Nevada and can replicate like a nuclear test, you can maybe try and argue Donatello is physically stronger, but that's really weird. I really don't want to argue that. So, it actually should be noted, DC Comics exist in the world of JoJo's, at least in the manga. This is anime only, so we kind of can actually avoid this because they took out the reference to Batman, I think. But if they didn't, that means Batman exists, and that also means Superman exists. So, Ungolo can probably get Superman to beat up Jotaro. As goofy as that sounds, it's just not very likely. We also know Jotaro is a good artist because he was able to draw the Egyptian fly from part 3. I'm not making this up if you skipped parts. He's literally, one of his stand abilities is precise drawing. So, those are the weird French cases, Ungolo and Donatello. He should just be fast enough and strong enough with this time stop to just beat anyone up. The idea that he's super nerfed from his part 3 self is somewhat true because of the opening scene, or the part where he says that he can't break down the bars to free Jolene. But he does actually have a 5-second time stop like he did in part 3. Yeah, the baby. So the problem here is that the green grass of Homestand is... It's like the pinnacle of defensive stands. But it can also attack, because the stand itself is sentient and will protect the green baby when anything shrinks down small enough to be its victim. This means that no one is actually capable of approaching and touching the green baby directly. So you have to be able to affect the green baby in ways other than physical interaction, and no one below can do this. If Donatello tries to fly a plane into the green baby, it will shrink infinitely. Mew Mew erasing its memories doesn't matter because Mew Mew can't interact with it. It doesn't really matter if Ungolo summons Superman, Superman will shrink. The only person that should actually be able to interact with the green baby on this list, funny enough, is actually Thunder McQueen. But I'm not going to count that remotely because that's a draw. Other than that, there is the chance... Let's see, the rods would just shrink. So at that point, maybe you have to argue that Weather Report... No, the frogs would shrink. The rods would shrink, the frogs would shrink. Sea Moon would probably shrink. Even though it is partly the green baby. It doesn't share the same stand. Foo Fighters would shrink. The more interesting interaction is actually Gwess and Goo Goo Dolls, but we do know that she has to get somewhat close. And it's hard to quantify the distance. John Gollier's bullets would shrink. Marilyn Manson can't really interact with it because it's not like sentient, like conscious enough to be intelligent enough to understand that. Yo-Yo Ma couldn't get close to it. Really? Now that it's like actually a baby and not like a weird like egg. So yeah, you could bring out any example of any character, but you can't hit it. So however, Heavy Weather should beat Green Grass of Home. This is because Green Grass of Home is capable of seeing, which means that it would be able to be affected by subliminal messaging. And the Green Grass of Home should turn into a snail. I know that's really lame, but that's how Heavy Weather's ability works for some reason, so... It should also be noted, Jotaro versus Heavy Weather is very weird, but I would more than likely give it to Heavy Weather if we assume that he's using his full kit and he's actually using subliminal messaging. Even if Jotaro pummels him with Time Stop, he's still going to see the reflection in the rainbow turn into a snail. Maybe you can argue that Jotaro would be able to overcome him after that, but Jotaro can't beat the green baby. So it's kind of a rock, paper, scissors in these 3 tiers where Jotaro loses to this, he loses to him, he loses to Jotaro. But I think that beating the green baby puts Heavy Weather much higher. I think that this is the correct order. Although I'm willing to admit that maybe it being a triangle is kind of fun. And yeah. No surprise there. Hayden Mevin. Maiden Heaven Poochie is the top of part 6. Maiden Heaven Poochie is like pretty high up in the whole verse, actually. In the anime, it's pretty much only outdone by Gold Experience Requiem. How does Poochie beat everyone? Faster and stronger, faster and stronger, faster and stronger, faster and stronger. Faster and stronger. Actually, we do actually have to talk about these 3. So Poochie versus Jotaro. We saw in the anime that Jotaro was actually able to somewhat stand up to Time Stop. However, we do know that Poochie should be capable of affecting living organisms. And that the reason he went after Jotaro and Jolene so heavily was out of a sense of loyalty and revenge for Dio. For instance, when we saw Poochie interact with the woman outside of the supermarket, or grocery store, whatever you want to call it, he was able to touch a carton of eggs and turn the eggs into hatchlings. So we know his ability works on living things. We also see that whenever Jolene's blood is drying, the blood dries super fast, even though that's technically part of her. So we do know that it has some effect on living beings, and we do know that Poochie says he directly made it not work on living beings so that his vision of heaven could be possible. Because his idea of heaven is more philosophical, right? This means that he should be able to use Made on Heaven on living creatures. And we see that he's able to affect everything in the universe to make it accelerate. So he has infinite range. Like literally. Unless you think that the universe is finite. That gets into a whole other discussion, but for the sake of it, we know that it should. This means that he can more than likely just speed up Jotaro himself and age him, like, insanely fast. We also know that Time Stop has a limited range, so all he has to do is just keep out of range of Time Stop and then age Jotaro to death. Same with Heavy Weather. If you want to argue that Maiden Heaven Poochie could still be turned into a snail, and that it would be accelerated by Heavy Weather, kind of like this Oxygen with Emporio, you actually could. The bigger problem is that I think Poochie would know that, and that Poochie could also accelerate the weather itself, because the weather itself isn't living, right? And we know that he can affect all of that. So even if he created rainbows that turned people into snails, he would be able to accelerate the weather past that phenomenon into a clear sky again. Like, Heavy Weather could constantly create rainbows that turn people into snails, but then they would just get aged over and over and rain and dry up and condensate somewhere else and evaporate, go through the water cycle over and over. And it would happen so fast that Poochie would essentially be unaffected. And then when it comes down to physicality, he would be able to kill Weather Report very easily. The biggest one is how he interacts with the green baby, but it should be the same thing. To where if he ages the green baby itself, it doesn't really matter if he can get close to it or not. So Poochie is very obviously the top of the verse, and the way he lost to Emporio was more for the thematic and narrative reasons than direct power scaling. So This was my list on all of the Part 6 stand users. I think the only person I left out is like Dio. Dio is shown in flashbacks or whatever, but I don't care. It's just, he's like right here, maybe here. That's all it is. So, make sure to comment below and tell me what I got wrong, what you would change. I'm not just saying it for the algorithm, I'm genuinely curious. I'm pretty sure about these 4. I'm more so interested in like these 2 tiers, but maybe you just think Mew Mew absolutely annihilates Sports Maximum, so make sure to tell me what you think. Stream on Twitch, Nick is a Neat. I tweet on Twitter, that's Nick is a Neat. You're watching this on my main channel, but I have a VOD channel too. Should be in the description. And the template. I made the template because no one has like Poochie, Sea Moon, and Maiden Heaven. So I made it, and I'll make sure to link the template in the description. And if I change my mind on any of these placements, I'll save it and link it too. But that should be the list. Yeah, these are all like the relevant stand. There we go. We can get everyone on screen. But that's the list. Hope you enjoyed it. See, tell me what you would change, plug everything. That's the list. Alright. Bye.